Dr. Doreen January is the
Dr. Doreen is an expert in autism.
Doreen January.
Dr. January.
Dr. Doreen January.
Dr. Doreen January is a visionary in the field of autism. Now you can ask her questions on Ask Dr. Doreen. We're here with Dr. Doreen January. Always thrilled to be here with you.
Thank you so much. Good to be here.
And for those of you who don't know, Dr. January is a true expert in the field of autism. She's been working in this field for a ridiculous number of years. For one who has such good skin, right? It doesn't equate, right? But she's worked with a wide variety of individuals, everything from very young babies to senior citizens. She has a wealth of knowledge. She's truly a visionary in this field, that she recognizes not only that people on the spectrum are whole people, they have whole lives, and that has to be addressed, which thank you for looking at our kids and our adults and everyone in between that way. But she also recognizes that they have a group of people around them that are a support staff, and that those people have individual needs as well, be that the family, siblings,
right.
And also the people who are helping to take care of and to treat, that those are people who have to be also included in an equation of what do we need to do to make the most progress.
Absolutely.
So, and you help to take care of all of us,
Thank you
which
so
I
much.
appreciate.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you, honestly. So she is going to answer questions that you guys have sent in. We always like to give you a disclaimer at the start of the show that there is no expert in any field, no matter how many years they work, that could give individual specific advice in this particular format.
Right.
There is telehealth, which is different than this, right? But in this format, she's going to give you information of a general nature,
Right.
which is still incredible.
Well, I hope it'll help.
People write in all the time and say how helpful this is.
That's
so,
great. That's great.
And this weekend I got to meet a lot of people in person who were saying that they were
Love
big
your
fans
show.
of the
Oh,
show,
that's great.
and that how helpful this is, and
That's
how much they
awesome.
learn from it. So truly wonderful. But you have to write in. So take advantage of the many different ways to write in. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. And I'm going to start with a question that came in last week that we didn't get to. What does the research say about young children getting only 20 hours a week of ABA therapy? Is it at all effective? I can't quote this, but I once heard about a study that did 20 hours a week for a group of children with autism and compared with children in regular ed who did not receive service, and they made equal progress, and this came into us last week. So, what would you like to say to that?
So, one of the things about autism that's really important for us to pay attention to is that no two children are the same, right? The children are very different from each other. And so I never really like to generalize and say, oh, 20 hours isn't enough. For one child, it might be enough. For another child, it might not be enough. Historically, the concept is that if you are doing a comprehensive ABA program, so if you're trying, and let me define that, the goal of ABA, I'm going to just keep going back in time. The ABA became an important thing, and back when we were able to, in the 80s, show that by doing intensive ABA, children on the spectrum were actually able to recover from autism. So this is when the world started paying attention to this science and said, and everyone was like, oh my gosh, it's actually shows that these children don't have a lifelong genetic disorder necessarily, and that if you do all the right things, it is possible for at least some children to lead normal lives. And so that was the beginning of a whole new era of looking at the application of behavior analysis or behavioral psychology to autism. And so the original study, which was the LOVA study in '87, which was the seminal study in our field, changed everything, showed that there were three groups of children, and there was one group that was our experimental group. And this group was receiving 40 hours a week. They were receiving more than 40 hours a week, and that's kind of something that people don't realize. The reason that we had said 40 hours was because parents work 40 hours a week. So those were the hours where a therapist was working with the child. But really, in that study, we had trained the parents to the point that they were part of the team. And so when the therapists were gone home, the child would continue to receive therapy from the parents. And we did that for many years after the 87 study as well, where parents were actually part of the therapy team. Which makes me think maybe we should start actually pushing that a little bit more.
I'm just having a moment here where I'm like, I don't emphasize that enough.
Yeah, and it's funny, if you go back and read that original study where the biggest success was, you can see that it should say every waking hour. And I remember this because we used to talk about that. We used to say, when we were determining recommendations, we'd always look at, if it's a 2-year-old, they're not as awake as long as a 4-year-old is, right? They take naps and so on. So we'd look at covering every waking hour using the entire team and the family, the parents.
And I think a lot of people know that you were a part of that study.
Absolutely,
that study that came out in 87.
Yeah, for sure. In fact, the film of the study I helped make. So I worked very hard on that study, and many of the children, I knew most of those children, and was part of their treatment teams or supervising their treatment teams. So I knew those kids. So what was very important was that we did this study. That was our experimental group. The other two groups were receiving either 10 hours a week of our type of therapy, and that was only because they were too far from UCLA. And at that time, we had students doing this therapy, and we couldn't send them to 50 miles out. So those kids were receiving 10 hours a week just because we were not in a position to give them 40. And then there was the third group. The third group was receiving about 10 hours a week of intervention at a different section of UCLA, which was called the Neuropsychiatric Institute, NPI, which is now Semel Institute.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that was NPI. And so essentially what ended up happening after about 2.5 years, and there were other things, like we tried to match the kids were all below a certain age, below age 3.5, 4. So what ended up happening after a couple of years was that our group, half of the kids had recovered, and I'm going to talk about the definition of that, the experimental group. The other two groups who were receiving 10 hours each, one of them, remember, was receiving 10 hours of our own intervention. It just wasn't enough, and only 2% of those children had actually recovered, which was really one child, and 47% of the experimental group had. So this really showed that there's a huge difference when you do intensive work. If you don't do enough intensive work, it's just not going to hit all the kids. It's not going to work.
But that's everything in life.
That's everything in life.
If you're trying to learn to play the violin and you only spend an hour on it a week, you're going to get a much different result than if you spend 40 hours a week on it.
That's exactly right. Now, that's a great example, because when you look at something like playing the violin, even if you do an hour a week, eventually in 40 years you might learn just as much as someone who did 10 hours a week learned when they were 5. You know what I mean? So what you're doing by doing less hours is you're extending the time frame. Now, with children who are learning, you don't have the luxury of extending the time frame, because when you do that, the child is aging, right? The chronological age is increasing. And as they get older and older and older, two things happen. One is there are thousands more things they have to learn. Just think about what a 2-year-old is capable of doing as opposed to a 6-year-old or 5-year-old. I mean, a 5-year-old being able to teach all the things that a typically developing 5-year-old knows how to do is a massive amount of work. And then on top of that, the child now has to go to school as well. So your hours are going down. Your hours of availability for this child are going down, and the amount of stuff that the child has to learn is increasing. So that's one thing. The other thing that happens is brain plasticity goes down. So the highest, we just can't learn enough when we're past age 7. But this is why people who are fluent in multiple languages have always been exposed to those languages prior to age 7, because the highest flexibility of the brain and the ability to learn new material is much, much younger.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, the concept of teaching a child intensively is very, very important. Now, if you have a child, so that's to the study, right? That's the key study. I think the study that you are referring to here is the Sallows study, the Glenn Sallows study. And you should actually go back and look at that study. It's not a matter of there was equal progress. There were a lot of different findings in that study. And here's what I want you to think about. Don't worry about a study. You have a child. And what's important is to think about your child, because studies in general, the findings of a study are relevant only in that they apply to masses. When you're looking at one single child and you're looking at a spectrum disorder like autism, it's really valuable, more valid, much more valid if you have the ability to just look at your child and see what would be appropriate for your child. If there's a very, very high functioning young child, then obviously what they have to learn is less, and you have more time because they're very young, like 2 years old. If it's a very severely autistic older child, then obviously what they need to learn is more, and you're out of time, right? So this is what's important. How much time do you have, and how severely in need is your child? So that's why I always say, do an assessment to find out exactly what your child needs. That's why many years ago, as you know, Shannon, we developed the skills index, the assessment on skills. And I really recommend for this viewer to get on skills. And that is just, you go online and you look for skillsforautism.com.
I have a little tent somewhere and I'm looking
I know,
for
I
it
don't
to
see
see.
it anywhere.
I moved it off the desk. I'll find it.
But essentially, just Google skillsforautism.com and you'll go in there. And there's an assessment portion, and it starts with asking you questions about your child. You put in your child's age, your chronological age, and so the assessment will give you every possible skill that a typically functioning child of that age should be able to master, should be able to do right now. So it'll ask you questions. It'll ask you hundreds of questions. For example, it'll start with, does your child make sounds? If you say yes to that, you go to more advanced questions like what kind of sound. It's all yes and no. Does your child make this type of sound? Does your child say single words? Does your child communicate in 3-word phrases? Does your child use these types of adjectives, or whatever it is? It keeps going on, and that's just language, but the questions are through all areas of functioning. So you'll get a series of questions in language, motor, adaptive skills, social skills, play skills. Let's see, motor is both fine motor and gross motor. Executive functions, cognitive skills. I mean, it's pretty much across all areas of functioning, including academic. So you answer all these questions, yes or no, my child can or cannot, and you'll get a nice little visual that shows the deficits, like the areas your child is not doing, and they should, because it's their age level. Like, you should be actually able to say 3-word phrases if you are age 2, that sort of thing. And it'll give you an exact listing of all the different sub-skills that need to be taught to catch your child up to a certain age. If you look at that, and now someone who is experienced with ABA will come in and they'll start doing work with your child for a few months. This is the most accurate you can get. And if it's a good BCBA who's done this for many years, that's very important, because this is really based on experience, right? You look at the rate of acquisition of the child. Now, we've actually developed an algorithm which we're trying to get on external skills so people can play with this. And once your child is learning for 6 months or so, we develop what's called a rate of learning line. Like, it'll show how fast your child masters things. Does your child master them, like a new thing every hour? Does your child master a new concept every week? Whatever it is, of a certain difficulty level, right? So it shows kind of like if your child is mastering things at this angle versus at this angle, that means they're mastering things pretty rapidly. You put in your child's age, you put in you have a history of your child's learning rate. That's learning rate. That's the number of items they learn over time. And then you know how long and how many hours, and you say, okay, my child's only 2, and I have like 3 more years where my child will be 5. And how much intensity do I need for 3 years in order for my child to actually get to typical levels? So he's missing, let's say, 200 skills. I need to teach these 200 skills, and he's learning at this rate. How many hours a week should I actually do in order for my child to hit the line of trajectory that gets to the point where he's going to master all these 200 things, right? It'll tell you the intensity. Now, the intensity is going to be either very intense, like 40 hours or more, or it's going to be 20 hours, or it's going to be 10 hours. It depends on your child and your child's rate of learning. That's like way more accurate than looking at what past research has said. Now, all of that aside, I do want to say kind of a disclaimer about this, because I'm one of those people that would like to, you know, when your child has aged, they've aged. The time has passed, right? So it's always better to err on the side of being cautious and doing more rather than doing less, because by doing more, all you're doing is speeding up time, right? Your child might master things faster than age 5. They might get to the level of normal by 4. Great. Everybody's happy. By doing less, you might miss the mark, right? Your child might get to age 5 and 6 and your funding all cut out and you have to go to school and your child still has 100 things left to learn. That's why I always push people to go for more intensity at the beginning when the child is young, because later on, a lot of issues happen. It's much harder to get funding for older kids. And there's a million other things that you're dealing with, academics and safety and lots of other things.
But now, having said that...
A huge, long answer,
right,
sorry.
But having said that, for the mom of the 15-year-old who's watching, who's never had ABA... we don't want you to think that there's no reason to get ABA now. Even though your child has aged out... And
aged out of
that
recovery.
Intensive early,
aged out of recovery. That doesn't mean anything, right? Because for the 15-year-old, you have, let's say, you're at a point where there are like 100 skills missing, and the key skills that you want to teach your child, which would keep him safe, help him communicate, get him to a point where he can have a vocation, get him to a point where he might be able to live independently. All of those things do not necessitate teaching all 100 skills. You just maybe have to teach 20, 30 skills, and that's extremely doable. ABA is a way of teaching. It's not something that you age out of. It's effective even if you're 70 years old. It doesn't matter what age you are. It is a technique for teaching, and it works more than anything else. And it works not just with the population of individuals with autism, it works on us. It works with everyone. It's the most effective way of changing behavior. So absolutely, for the 15-year-old, for the 30-year-old, yesterday we had a call from someone who's, they were calling for a 45-year-old. And I was excited about it, because bringing someone in at that age to our adult center and helping them is very exciting.
It's life-changing.
Absolutely.
I mean, the families who, it's just so incredible to think that sometimes there's one little thing that if you could fix it, the quality of life goes up for everyone, for that individual and for everybody who loves them. You know, so don't feel like there's no reason after a certain time. But if you are in that window of time when your child is young, take everything that you can and use it to the max. You will, I say this to parents every day of the week, you will never be sorry if you do everything and more.
That's right.
You will get someplace that you didn't know that you could get. It will be different for every single person. But the thing that's great is you will have nothing left in you that's like, oh, I wonder if we had... Right?
Right.
I see the parents of the teenagers who go, oh man, I missed the boat. And they, you know, I hate it when parents are stuck there because they're missing something right now. If you've got a young kid, don't give that to yourself later on. Give yourself the gift of knowing we did everything that we could and do as many hours as you can.
Right.
All right, on that note, we're going to take a short break and then we're going to be back to answer more of your questions, so stick with us. I want to move from the question that we were talking about frequency, although I could talk about that forever, and I'm sure you could too. We had a mom who wrote in a two-part question, and I believe it's the same mom who wrote in both parts of the question, but maybe not, but I think so. So the first part, she said, hi, I'm a mom of a 15-year-old that was diagnosed with selective mutism at age 5 and got a new diagnosis in this past summer. Because my son is still not able to speak in public, the BCBA thinks that he could benefit from an augmentative device, and is there a place that we can get a donation for one? But then we got the next thing, and I do think they're connected, said, hi, I have a child who was diagnosed with selective mutism at 5. This is why I think they're the same. Autism was ruled out because according to all the specialists, if it was autism and he speaks at home, he would speak in all settings, which I don't understand that, but we'll continue on. Another reason was that he had eye contact, even though it was only for a second or two. He's now 15 and we finally got an autism diagnosis this past summer. I feel like he's running out of time and decided to pay out of pocket for the diagnosis. This doctor looked at us and said, you'll have to convince me that he's not on the spectrum. The problem is he's in a category in which there is no box he can check. We took him to an autism center for an intake, and one RBT said that she doesn't see the autism. We have so much to talk about. How do we deal with people like that, and how do we help him at such a late age? Let's first of all start with talking about what an RBT is and isn't.
Right.
Let's start there, shall we?
Sure. An RBT is a registered behavior technician, so it's someone who actually has a high school diploma and 40 hours of training. They should not be in a position to tell you what they see or don't see. They're not a diagnostician. They do not have any idea what the symptoms of autism are. So that is just an inappropriate comment, and you can ignore that completely. So that's that.
Thank you very much.
Moving on from that, though, there's a lot of different things here that we can dissect and jump into. And I would want to say it is extremely unusual for a child to fully communicate at home, and for a child on the autism spectrum to fully communicate at home but not in public. That is why I wonder what I want to ask you, and I can't really comment on this because I haven't seen your child, and I don't know what other factors there are. I don't know what his level of communication is at home. I don't know when you say public what you are referring to, et cetera, but what I want to say is, why, let me just ask you, why do you feel that the diagnosis of selective mutism is not appropriate for your child? Because what you are describing, a child who speaks at home but does not speak in public, could be a diagnosis of selective mutism. And why do you think that he has autism? What other symptoms? Speaking or not speaking is only one of many symptoms that need to be present for a diagnosis of autism. So I would say you, and I don't know what kind of doctor it was that you saw who said you'll have to convince me he's not on the spectrum. Then I'd like to know, what are the symptoms that the doctor saw or you see that indicate to you that he's on the spectrum of autism? That's where I am. You know, and I'm very cautious about that because both things happen. We have a lot of people who have autism who have a very hard time trying to convince anyone that they have autism. At the same time, what's starting to happen now is a lot of people who don't have autism and have other issues, and because autism is in the news every day, they feel, oh, maybe I have autism too. And so I've experienced both sides of this now because I do diagnose people, and it's more than ever before in my career, and I have been diagnosing since 1992, Shannon, so a long time. I've seen hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of people at all ages for diagnosis alone. I have to say, more than any other time in my entire career, I'm getting people who are not on the spectrum, who either think they are or believe they are or were told they are or are just lost and confused about some issue, mental health issues they're having, and they wonder if it's autism.
Yes.
So it's really important.
It's very important, and I think it's important to discuss what I love. I mean, we are here at the Center for Autism and Related Disorders.
Correct.
And you do treat more than just autism here.
Of course.
And I think it's really important. Everybody gets bogged down in the, well, I need the diagnosis. And I love that you always say here on the show, you do if you want funding.
Yeah.
But not even that anymore, because there is funding for ABA now for other things as well.
Yeah.
And that I think it's super important that we talk about the difference between, do I need to get the diagnosis or do I just need to take action?
Right.
And because a lot of times people, like, you know, we have a lot of adults who will come in and say, what do I need to do to get the diagnosis? And the first conversation that we end up having is, do you really need, like, what's your issue?
Right.
Is there something that you're having a hard time with?
Right.
And then let's address that.
Right.
If you find that you would feel better getting the diagnosis,
Right.
or if you feel that it would open doors to funding for you, then absolutely that's a path that you should take. But here we have a 15-year-old who clearly has issues. And what's frustrating for me, for this parent, is that the conversation keeps swirling about does he or doesn't he. What I'd like to know is, have any of these people said, let's treat this individual?
Exactly. So, and perhaps they're trying to help in terms of giving you the diagnosis of selective mutism, because a diagnosis of selective mutism is more indicative of anxiety, and then you're down a completely different path, which also would indicate, okay, maybe he should be on antidepressants, which are anti-anxiety and antidepressants, the same thing. Or maybe he should be going down that path. Maybe he should be getting cognitive behavior therapy. The importance of a diagnosis is only because it helps classify the individual in a group where we know what type of treatment has worked for that group. But realistically, if you are concerned, let's figure out what are the symptoms and how do we change them. It could be a combination of behavior therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, medications that are helpful, a variety of other types of psychological interventions. So that's the real answer to this, right? It's like, let's not try to go for a particular diagnosis because we think that there's more help in that arena. It could be the absolute inappropriate help. If your child, it doesn't need ABA, maybe they need more CBT, maybe they just need some SSRIs. Like, this is what's important to identify, is actually what are the symptoms. So this is a mom.
And what does he need?
And what does he need? So, you know, realistically, if you write in some of the symptoms and things that you're seeing that you're concerned about, it might be that I can guide you to what type of individual or doctor you should see. I could guide you to a whole array of possible areas that you should be investigating more. Maybe it is autism, I don't know. There's just not enough here to be able to tell.
Okay, so take the opportunity to write back to us. You can do it on the live feature on our website, which is what you did before, or you always, all of you have the ability to email me. My email is s.penrod, PENROD, at autism- that's the one in the middle, live, LIVE.com. You can write to me, and then you're not held to a certain number of characters, and you can outline the whole thing. And
I would ask, if you're going to write in, I would ask specifically that you describe how he speaks at home. What is his level of communication? Because you say that he's speaking at home. What level of communication does he have at home? What types of things does he? How complicated of a communication? Can he express everything at home? Are there delays in his mode of communication at home as well? They're just not as much, but describe what he's functionally doing at home. And then also, does he have anxiety? That I think is important for me to know.
Okay, I just want to take just a second to address some of the people on Facebook who are just writing in and saying hi. We want to say hi to Paula and Nava and Faith. Faith, you wrote in a question and I'm not sure that I understand, so if you could give me a little bit more information. She said, well, what can be done with dolls and stuffed animals? Write in and be a little bit more specific with me, Faith, and then we'll know. Samantha Leone is watching,
that's
and
awesome.
shout out to Samantha. Samantha said, imagine if more masters in their field were this accessible and generous to those who need help. And she said, love Dr. D and Shannon and miss you. And Samantha, we miss you so much. I can't even, don't make me cry. Rosie says hi. Helen says hi. We're doing good, Helen. How are you? Also, Monica is watching, and we reached out to have Monica on the show with her daughter. Monica, I'm not going to say your last name because but Monica, you may know, you have met Monica and her child before. Alicia is watching as well. So thank you to all of you for writing in, and we so appreciate it. Thomasina wants to know, what do you do when children can't go to sleep and stay up all night? And like, we get this question a lot, right? Sleep is a big part of what people want to know.
Sleep is a big one, and it's one where I don't recommend you try to tackle this on your own. I often try to teach parents as much as I can to enable them to do things on their own without help, but this is a tough one. Because you will be physically exhausted. Like, this is one where I really feel like it takes a village, right?
Yep.
On sleep issues. And it's important to have a tremendous amount of support. Like, we're talking 3-4 people, because, including you, because you will have to, as a parent myself who's gone through sleep 3 times with my kids, you will have a lot of emotion around this, and you will be exhausted. And you will want to disturb the protocol because you will want to protect your child. This is a very typical reaction for parents, because the sleep one, and I'll talk about it in a minute, is very emotional for parents. And so what you need is to be able to have trusting people around, people that you trust fully, so that you can be removed for periods of time, and they can help manage the protocol. The protocol involves, first, the BCBA working with you will establish some baselines, and will be able to identify kind of exactly when your child wakes up, for what potential reasons are waking the child up. Obviously, you want to eliminate all of those types of things. For instance, it is tremendously important to make sure that the child is in darkness. Darkness is very important. Sounds, our children are extremely sensitive to sounds. Often we don't realize these are sounds we don't even hear, they hear. So you want to make sure that there's no background noise. Little things I find have been very important, like in the middle of the night, the sprinklers go on in the neighbor's house, and your child is so sensitive that they hear that and wake up from it. Other things that could be waking your child up are these are all antecedent modifications. So things like, if in the past you have always given your child something to drink or eat when they wake up, our stomachs have a very interesting way of alerting us to that. They're like an alarm clock almost. So if the child has been in the habit of actually eating or drinking something every time they wake up, they will continue to wake up. It's just a very common thing that happens with all human beings. It's very easy to train the stomach to work like an alarm clock. So that could be something that's leading to the child waking up. But most likely what happens with our children is they wake up, they will either come to you as the parent, or they will call out for you and you will go. And we
have a follow-up too. She wants to know if stress has anything to do with the behavior.
With waking up? I mean, it's possible, absolutely, of course. Stress has to do with everything, but children generally are not waking up as a result of stress. Stress is most of the time something that'll affect adults, but it's possible. It's something to be considered. But the main thing that I want you to think about is what usually happens when a child wakes up is that we reward it. And the way that we reward it, it's inadvertent, but we walk in, we hug the child, we try to calm them, So the child, or they come to you and they sleep in your bed, a hugely rewarding activity. And when they're very, very little, when they're babies, that's the natural response. And of course, you have to do that because the child can't express what it is they actually want. But unfortunately, what ends up happening is that the child falls on a routine, on a habit, where they feel like, okay, every time I get up, someone's going to come and take care of me. And so it becomes a habit that has been rewarded. And like anything else, any other behavior, you remove the reward and you reward the behavior that's completely contrary to it, which is sleeping. And that's why it's very, very hard for parents, because if a child has gotten into the habit of you coming in, and I tell you, now you need to stop going in, the child's going to get up and try to come to you, and then I tell you, you need to make sure the child cannot exit their room. You're going to be traumatized. You are going to be traumatized. You're going to think, oh my God, how can I ignore my child screaming and crying in there? And really what's happening is nothing. The child is just breaking a habit, and sometimes breaking a habit is very, very hard. So that's why I sort of really suggest with sleep, you have a professional there who can work this through with you very gradually and slowly. For instance, if you go in, you cannot stay longer than X amount of seconds or minutes, and you gradually reduce that, and you no longer go in, and you can just communicate on a monitor instead of going in. There's a lot of ways we can fade you out so that your child realizes, no one's coming in, I'm going to have to self-regulate myself, I'm going to have to soothe and calm myself, and I'm going to have to settle down. And then their sleep becomes normalized. Now, I say all this from a behaviorist perspective. A lot of times, sometimes it happens that we work on this. Most of the time it's successful right away, like literally 3 nights, and the whole thing is over. It's just the child becomes very easy to soothe and calm, and they sleep. In almost 99% of the time that happens. Once in a while, you'll have a child who's having something like subclinical seizures, or some other thing is happening, like maybe apnea or something is happening where the child is not able to self-calm. And those are the children who after 3 nights, they're still uncomfortable and crying and so on. And that's when I recommend you see a physician and do a series of tests to make sure none of that's happening. But in general, the most common, by far, the most common reason children wake up is because we tend to calm them, we tend to soothe them, and they become used to it.
Great, and she said thank you already.
Oh, that's great.
So wonderful, wonderful advice. All right, we're going to take a short break, and then when we come back, we're going to come back with Chris has written in and said, what do you think about children playing online games with others for social interaction?
That's great.
So
Great question.
stick with us. We're going to be back after these messages. We had a question that came in from Chris, and Chris wanted to know what you think about individuals playing games online with other people and socializing, and how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel that, and I've often said this to you, I feel like we all need to recognize the fact that online gaming and also it's just it's the way that people socialize now. I mean, things have changed from, I would say 20 years ago, I would be telling parents, please be very careful, especially for some of my kids where I couldn't get them to give eye contact. I would really recommend to reduce computer time as much as possible. And then a few years later, I was like, well, they can definitely learn a lot on computers, so let them do it as long as it's not excessive. And now I guess what I want to say is this sort of the same thing. It's, what I'm always shooting for, my goalposts, let's put it that way, my goalposts have to do with typically the behavior of typically developing kids. So when you have children who are typically developing and 99% of their time is gaming online with other people they don't even know, then I feel like, okay, to some extent that is pretty normal, and it's fine, and we should perhaps allow our children to do some of that. The only concern that I have with that for our kids is, a typically developing child might recognize when there's a predator out there or there's someone who's acting inappropriately, whereas our children may not recognize that. So as long as, you know the other people who are online with the child and they're all playing, then I would say it's perfectly fine as long as it doesn't take up the child's all day and all life, so that it is restricted to certain times of the day, and that other more important things have been done, then I think it's perfectly fine, because that is how children socialize right now.
And especially for young men.
Absolutely.
I think that girls play online too, but one of the great litmus tests for me, I mean, I have a husband who does voiceovers for video games, so I don't count him as an actual good representation, because he has the excuse if he's playing a game, he always says to me, it's research, honey. Right? And I can't dispute that. But we have a great, he's a BCBA now who works here at the Center for Autism, that was on our team for a while. We've had him on the show before, CJ Miyake. And I don't want to throw CJ under the bus, but he has said to me before, when I've expressed to him, like, is this okay? Is this all right? That he still, as an adult, like, gets online in the weekend and will play with friends from high school and college, and they'll play a game together. And,
Absolutely.
And how healthy that is for him and his friends. It's a way of connecting. And that sort of quieted a lot of my fears. I was like, there's no more regular guy than CJ. Like, we all hope that our kids grow up to be like somebody like, he's the definition. You look up in the dictionary, great guy. There's a picture of CJ Miyake. Smart,
absolutely,
wonderful husband, family man, good in his field. Like, there's no negative about him. And he says, this is fun for me.
Totally.
And I connect with my friends doing
and
this.
At all ages. I mean, Sonny, my son, who's 20 now, he will, and this is a way for him to stay in contact with his buddies from high school, right? So, and they're all over the country now. They're not in the same place. So they'll do this, like, maybe once a month, once a week. Whenever the three of them are available, they'll do this.
Yeah.
So I think it is definitely part of social behavior right now, no question about it. And there's nothing wrong with it, as long as you're sure that the other people are safe.
That's right.
Because even with Sonny, I remember when he first started doing this, he met someone who was a active Marine who was playing with him from Afghanistan. And I was like, this is kind of crazy. I can't believe this. And then he used to actually, how I found out about it was that we were out one time and he was like, I gotta go play. I'm like, Sonny, when we're out to dinner, we don't rush for a game.
Right.
And he said, but you don't understand, this guy's a Marine, he's counting on me.
Right.
This is his like only open time, I gotta go play with him.
Right.
And I got to know the guy and I realized he's a super nice guy. And you know what, great, we'll do this for the Marines.
Exactly. And I gotta stop you because I gotta let you go.
Right.
It's time.
Thank you.
So thank you so much.
Thank you so
much. We look
much,
forward to next week with you being here.
Always fun.
You guys hang on, we're gonna be back with Let's Talk Autism with Shannon and Nancy. Stick with us.